Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the video. So, what I'm going to talk about today is fantasy football. Um, I really enjoy fantasy football. It's one of my favorite things in the NFL. I really like the NFL games, but fantasy football is fun, especially if your team is not doing that well this season. For that season, which I'm a Washington fan, the Washington football team, and we had a good year this past year, but it's generally been pretty bleak for quite a while. So it's kind of fun to go to fantasy football when you got teams like that you're following. But anyway, I have some interesting strategies that I think work really well for me that are not exactly very well known. I guess there's certain things that I like to do that I don't think is necessarily put out in articles or mainstream fantasy football networks. But so I want to share that and kind of hopefully help you guys be successful with that as well. I'm not an expert by any means. I'm just a fan, but it's something I enjoy doing, and I think this could give you, just another fan's perspective of how you can be successful at it. So, what I want to do is I'm not going to get into specifics because it's the off season right now, and things are going to change. We already heard all the rumors that are kind of going on right now, but I want to get through 7 points of how you can be successful in fantasy football. And it might take 2 videos, but I'm going to try to see if I can get through this in about 9.5 minutes before I run out on my phone. So bear with me. So the first point in terms of being successful in fantasy football, of my 7 strategies, is the draft is important, but you're not going to win your fantasy football league at the draft. So what do I mean by this? So it is very important to draft well, and there's certain players that you can pick that'll be very helpful, other players that'll hurt you. But ultimately, the moves that you make in season is going to determine whether or not you're going to win your fantasy football league. This includes waiver wire additions, trades, etc. So 2 points I kind of want to talk about with this. One of them is with regards to player stocks. So I kind of view fantasy football players as you're treating them as stocks, as if you're in a stockbroker. You've got guys who'll have some good games, but if you don't think it's sustainable, you'll want to try to flip them for better players. Good example, say if you have a running back who went off for 2 good games because he was playing weak run defenses, you could flip him for a better running back, and it'll help you for the rest of the season. And then the other point I want to talk about is hype of players when they get drafted. So a lot of times what will happen in the draft, especially with quarterbacks, is that you'll have guys go higher based on the hype around their name than they'll actually contribute to help you in the season. So a good example of this is Tom Brady. Tom Brady, probably the greatest quarterback of all time, probably the greatest NFL player of all time, but he's not a very good fantasy football player because you get very similar production from him as your quarterback as you do from a lot of quarterbacks around the league. And I'm going to get into this in more depth in a later video, but you want to make sure when you're drafting these players that you're not taking them too high based on their hype and where they're going to be drafted relatively to how they're actually going to perform. That's a big point of draft construction and how you're going to build your team to be successful. So, who do you want to find at the draft, who do you want to draft on your team that is going to be that guy that's going to be really helpful? And that brings me to my second point. You want to find guys that are going to be the focal point of your offense in your fantasy football team. So, what do I mean by this? So, if you look at NFL rosters, you want to find guys whose offense revolves around a certain player. A good example of this from last year was Alvin Kamara, because Michael Thomas was hurt. Drew Brees was hurt for part of the season as well. So when you have limited receiver weapons, limited quarterback weapons, they relied on Kamara a lot as both a receiver and a running back to help them. Other good examples of this are DeAndre Hopkins on the Arizona Cardinals, Devontae Adams on the Green Bay Packers, McCaffrey on the Panthers before he got hurt, and Derrick Henry, who the Titans are a very heavy run offense, and almost all, and Henry, the way that team is constructed, they give him the bulk of the carries. A lot of teams run a committee, but the Titans are committed to Henry as their lead back. So you want to find guys that'll be the focal point of your team. Last year, one of the things I did is I knew that Hopkins was the focal point of the Texans offense before he got traded. So I took a flyer on Will Fuller in my draft last year in the middle rounds, because he could potentially fill the void as the focal point of that offense. And it actually held true for a while until Fuller got suspended by the end of the season, but he did have a very productive year for the Texans. So that's what I'm talking about by focal points on offense. Number 3 point that I want to talk about is stocking running backs and wide receivers on your team. So on your fantasy football team, you want to make sure that running backs and wide receivers are almost maxed out on your team. You only want to have, for the rest of your team, you only want to have one quarterback, one tight end, one defense, and one kicker. And that kicker you have to draft in the last round. This is how I do it, because ultimately, all 4 of those positions, you can stream to get similar value from guys on waivers. So it doesn't really make sense to me why you would want to have any more than one of any of those 4 positions, because you can pick up that value. I mean, unless you have a elite quarterback like Mahomes or Deshaun Watson or something like that on a bye, then you pick up a quarterback. But when you initially build your team, you want to get a lot of running backs and wide receivers, because those are the ones that'll fill the most positions that you'll start. You've got 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and a flex. So you want to make sure you have 3 good options of wide receivers and running backs weekly, so that way you can plug and play them in and have a lot of options, not only for your team, but potentially for somebody else's team if you're going to try to flip them for a better player. Kind of like what I was talking about with stock assets. Running backs and wide receivers are going to always have up and down games, and you could always take advantage of them to potentially flip them for somebody who's better when they do have a good game. So you want to put yourself in a position that you have a big stockpile of running backs and receivers to potentially flip out to somebody else. Number 4 point, and then I'm probably going to make a second video because it's taking a little longer than I thought, but you want to take guys who have potential over guys who have modest gains, that are, you already kind of know who they are. That's my 4th point. So good example of this is that on the New Orleans Saints this past season. So when Michael Thomas was hurt, there was a void that had to be filled with a player who was going to come in and fill the fantasy production on that team. So a lot of people really liked Emmanuel Sanders as that guy because he's had a very productive career. He's done well in the past with guys like Peyton Manning on the Broncos, etc. But he's an older player, and he pretty much had already hit his ceiling about how good he was going to be. So for Emmanuel Sanders, it was a better or for the New Orleans Saints, it was a better play in terms of who to pick up on that particular team to fill the wide receiver void, to get Traquan Smith, a younger guy who's spent a little bit of time in the system and understands it a little better, and he's got more potential to show what he can do. And he actually had a more productive season than Emmanuel Sanders as a whole. So it goes to show things like that. Like, it doesn't really make sense when you're picking up veterans in late rounds on your team to fill the bench. Veteran guys who are not going to necessarily start because they've already hit their ceiling. You already know what they are. It's better to get guys that are younger rookies or younger second, third year players that you can figure out how good they're going to be, because those are the guys who have potential to really boom and help your team go from being a good team to being a championship winning team. So in my second video, I'm going to talk about 3 more strategies, but stay tuned and hope you enjoy the video. Thanks.